Can you hear us?
I can hear you, Doug. This is Brian Eads. Can you hear
Hey,
me?
Brian, I can hear you too.
Yeah.
Can you guys hear us?
Can you hear us now?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, I can too.
All right, I think we're going through the computer audio rather than the microphone. So when everybody gets talking, see if you can hear the mayor. If the mayor will do a mic check.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. And I don't know if you heard me, I did kick off the meeting and I introduced you, Mr. Carter, that we were just gonna walk through with you the different options here and then have general board discussion and be able to ask questions on the different options.
Certainly. Well, we're happy to be here today. Mayor, just for our benefit, are there other members of the town staff in the room with you all?
Well, yep, we have the town manager, we have the town clerk, finance officer is on her way, okay? Caitlin's on her way, and of course, we have the two chiefs.
Great. Good to see all of you. You all saw the spreadsheet that we sent you and that showed a multiplicity of alternatives. And then we graphically showed each of those. And I think our purpose for today is to simply go over those in the detail that you would like. And as you say, Mayor, answer questions.
Yes, sir.
Basically, what we did is broken down in three ways, three parts. One, all the revenues that we've been discussing, including occupancy taxes, which would include an increase to that occupancy tax of 1%, 2%, or 3%. And then, of course, parking revenues and revenues from property taxes. And in each case, they are looked at both as MSD oriented, and the MSDs are separated between 50-50, 60-40, and 70-30. And then there is a look at, under each of those alternatives, what happens if there's a 50-50 split between the MSDs and the towns for each of the respective percentages splits that I indicated to you earlier. And then there's a review of that same data if we do not have additional occupancy taxes and have only parking revenues. In each of the splits, in the same ways I discussed them earlier, are there. And then finally, what would happen if there are no parking or new taxes from occupancy tax? What would happen if it were purely done with property taxes between the MSD and the town? And so with that, because he prepared it and is the numbers guru, I'm going to turn this over to Andrew. Mayor, would you like him to go into each section and go down each one of the alternatives?
Yes, please.
Okay. Now, do you guys have them on screen or are
No.
you looking at them as a printed page?
We have them as a printed page.
But we
Okay.
can also put them, I can put them on the screen, we just have to guide me.
I have mine up too.
Is that the one he's talking about?
That's the one he's talking about.
So Andrew, do you want to start then please with the first alternative, which includes all of the property tax, which includes all of the revenue sources?
Correct. So in scenario one, we have scenario 1A through scenario 1AA. So we get all the way through the alphabet there. And as we said, in scenario 1A, 1B, and 1C, we're all assuming that there is parking revenue. We are assuming that there is either 1%, 2%, or 3% of additional occupancy tax. And then there was just, this is a no town-wide additional taxes would be incorporated. So this is only through those three sources: parking, new occupancy tax at 1%, 2%, or 3%. And then of course the 50-50 split between the ocean side and the sound side, phase 5. You'll see that at 1% occupancy tax, the ocean side would need a 45-cent increase in the MSD. At 2%, it's 38 cents. And at 3%, it's 30 cents. So you'll see for every 1% occupancy tax in this particular scenario, it is 7 or 8 cents worth to the phase 5 ocean side MSD. On the sound side, simply because of the values between the ocean side and sound side, if each section is to do a 50-50 split and create the same amount of revenue, because they are not, the values are not as high on the ocean side as it is on the sound side, or vice versa on the sound side and the ocean side, you would need 58 cents on the sound side to generate the same amount of money when a 50-50 split in the MSD. So you'll see it's 58 cents, 49 cents with 2% occupancy tax, and 39 cents for 3% occupancy tax. So
this is plus whatever is currently being charged.
Yes.
This is in addition to the existing, right? Okay, just want to make sure. Go ahead.
correct, yeah, this
Yes,
is all
this
in
is
addition
all-
to
Yeah,
current.
this is all new revenue in addition to the revenue you currently have.
Right.
Make sure.
So 1D, 1E, and 1F is that same scenario again, but what if we split with a townwide tax of 50-50? So you'll see in that same scenario, a 1% occupancy tax on the ocean side, you go from 45 cents to 23 cents. The sound side went from 58 cents to 29 cents, but there is an additional 11 cents townwide. So everyone in town would have an 11-cent increase. And so Oceanside would be 23 plus 11 because they'd be inside the MSD and subject to the townwide tax. So that's 34 cents on the Oceanside in total. And then 41 cents for the sound side on a 50-50 split. So the next exercise is keeping the parking and the phase 5 MSD split the same, but 1G, 1H, and 1I are, instead of doing a 50-50 townwide split, if we do a 60-40, where the town takes townwide is 60% of the revenue and 40% for the MSDs, and then those MSDs are split 50-50. You'll see that the town cents go from 11 to 13 on the high side. And then the particular MSDs drop again by about 3 or 4 or 5 cents, depending on the range. On the high side with 1% occupancy tax, that would be 18 cents on the ocean side, plus the 13, they would be subject to townwide. And then the sound side is 23 cents plus the 13 cents. So ultimately about 36 cents for sound side. Starting with 1J through 1L, these next three, is having the ocean side doing 70% of the generation in the MSDs and sound side being 30%. So instead of a 50-50 split between the ocean side and sound side and what they need to generate, we would do a 70-30 split. And so just like the other ones we went above, we first do the 1, 2, and 3% occupancy tax. You'll see that some of the pennies as compared to scenario 1A and 1J are very similar, except the split is for 70-30 rather than 50-50 in the MSD. You'll see the pennies for the ocean front jumped to 63, while the sound side dropped a bit to 35. That is that with no townwide help. That is what the new taxes within those MSD zones would be for 1J. 1K is a little bit better, 1L is a little bit better, depending on how much occupancy tax revenue comes in. So you'll see how we start kind of going through the same rhythm again. 1M through 1O is a 70-30 split with the MSD. It matches up with 1D, 1E, and 1F. You'll see that again, the number of pennies gets shifted more to the ocean side as they are having to generate the 70-30 split. And then having these townwide pennies come in reduces that on the 1M version to 32 cents on the ocean side, 18 cents on sound side, and 11 cents townwide. So in that particular instance, 32 plus the 11 townwide, they would see 43 cents in the Oceanside MSD and 29 cents on the sound side, with the rest of town going up 11. As we get more occupancy tax projected, you'll see those pennies start to shift down, as we said, between 4 to 6 pennies on the MSDs and approximately 3 pennies, 2 to 3 pennies on townwide as that's generated. The 60-40 splits start in 1S, that is splitting the phase 5 MSD 60-40 rather than 70-30 or 50-50 as we have in the other scenarios above. In that worst case scenario, 1S is parking revenues plus the phase 5 MSD split 50-50. Yeah, they get a lot of these numbers get hard to read on the big sheet. That's 54 cents ocean side, 47 cents on the sound side with no town help at 1% occupancy. And if we had split between townwide, you'll see that jumps to 27 cents ocean front, 23 cents sound front, and then again 11 cents townwide for the 1% occupancy. The graph, as we've all been talking, this is a lot of numbers to be thrown in front of everybody. As you see, we have about 24 different scenarios just in scenario 1. I'm not sure if we're able to bring up the graph, but it does a great job in being able to kind of see how each scenario affects the number of pennies that are needed. So as you see, we've grouped the first phase 5 MSD split, the 50-50, as the first 3 shows occupancy tax 1%, 2%, 3%. You'll see how the number of pennies needed in the MSDs drops each time we add additional possible occupancy tax revenues. The yellow bars, or the orangish yellow bars, are the townwide taxes. So you'll see in each one of those scenarios, as townwide taxes come in, it reduces the number of pennies needed in the MSDs alone. So you'll see the 50-50 split. The sound side in almost all scenarios have a higher tax rate increase than the beachfront. And that is simply due to a function of the values of the sound side properties as compared to the what we're calling the oceanfront properties on the other side of the highway. So you'll see when you do a 70-30 split, they widen back out the other direction. When the oceanfront is carrying 70% of the revenue generation in each one of the scenarios, you'll see the green bar is higher than the blue bar. And so in the last grouping is the 60-40 split. You'll see that they tighten up a bit. They're closer to each other's numbers between oceanfront and sound side. And then, so this gives more of a graphical representation of where the rates might have to go dependent on the splits within the MSDs and then splits with or without any townwide tax. And this one, of course, shows the 1%, 2%, or 3% of occupancy tax. So it created a number of scenarios for us to look at. Any questions before we move off of scenario 1?
Any questions?
Yes, Ms. Meyer. That's assuming that the 3% occupancy tax that we already get is going there, correct? No.
The additional 3% that we'd be asking for.
Okay, but the first 3% is not figured into this. Okay.
That's exactly right. As we know from our previous discussions, there's an overlapping time period where you're going to have to continue to pay the USDA loan out of the existing revenues you have, which includes your current taxes from occupancy tax, sales tax, some property tax, and things of that nature. Now in we estimate perhaps fiscal 26 seems more likely when the USDA is paid off. Then essentially you're in a circumstance where you have your funding, your existing funding, not the new we're now discussing, but your existing funding. And I think that will be a critical time for the Board of Aldermen to look at their various revenue sources and say, can we begin to reduce certain forms of revenue that we have, taxation or others? Or do we need that additional roughly $3 million that will be freed up when we're no longer paying the USDA? Do we need that to invest in the next phases of beach nourishment inside the town? So I think there'll be a critical decision after fiscal 26 on how are you going to use the revenues that are no longer needed to pay the USDA loan. Did that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Mike's got a question.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Two questions really, Mr. Carter. So you mentioned in 2026, once we have the initial construction paid off, we've still got the, are you hearing me okay?
I can hear you. Yes, sir.
Good. Once we have that initial construction paid off, then we're going to be in the renourishment phase for the next 50 years. But my kind of thinking on the renourishment phase is about 50% of the cost per year as the initial construction phase. Therefore, it would be my thought that we would actually be able to cut this tax rate almost 50% after the first, after 2026, when we paid off initial construction, because we'd have like 6 years at least to generate enough income to pay for that next renourishment cycle. You see what I mean?
I
Would you
do.
agree with that?
I think this, I think if what we've heard from the Corps is correct, that they start our project in 22 is what they said. And they further said that they think that there will be a 5-year time period before the first renourishment. So essentially that would put us in 27 or 28, depending on when they really get started, before we would then have your cost for renourishment. So I think you're right. I think there's a time period in there where we're going to have the existing revenues that we currently have and the new revenues that we've had to raise during this overlapping time period. And that's when you'll make critical decisions on, can you lower tax rates for the renourishment and then continue to use your roughly $3 million a year in revenue to do other renourishment? Or are you going to take some of that money and reduce even further what you're charging? So I think the year 26 and 27 and 28 are going to be critical years to look at how much do you really need to have in order to do nourishment, probably townwide, not just in this first zone.
Yeah, and that was my point in asking my first question, was that I think as our property owners and citizens think about what we're talking about in terms of the federal project and the board, that there will become a point in time that we will be able to reduce this tax rate, whatever we decide on. So I think that's something we should just keep in mind for the future. My second question, and this is not really a question, it's just the light bulb finally went off in my head, and I was calculating the townwide tax increase in each of the scenarios where the town, there's a town split. And what we really need to be doing, well, I think probably everybody else got this, but I didn't. We need to take that yellow bar in this graph, and we need to add that to the green and blue bar to get the actual tax increase for the people that would be in the municipal service district. And that wasn't done until your presentation today. So I just wanted to clear that up in my own
Right.
understanding. Thank
Right.
you.
Yeah, the first graphics that we handed you, which were much more simple before we got into the various numbers of splits between the MSDs, how much revenue we were estimating, 1, 2, or 3%. In the beginning, the first graphic we handed you showed not only the payment of town taxes, but also these taxes, townwide taxes, and taxes for the county, so that you could show a complete tax the number of pennies that would be paid by each of residents of the town, including county and the current townwide taxes. So I think once we get to choosing options here, and because obviously when you look at 50-50, that's a pretty tough one when the ocean side is paying less than the sound side. So I think when we finally begin to say, what are the splits we're interested in, then we will again demonstrate for you what is the relative tax for a citizen of the town for townwide taxes, district taxes, and taxes to the county, so that you can get a full view of what property taxes will be.
Just in response, I think that Mayor Pro Tem made a good point about expectations for taxpayers in 2026. But I think that just to be candid, I think that we have to make clear to people that there are no plans to reduce those taxes at that time, and we will look at them for a couple of reasons. One is we have seen a dramatic increase in the cost of this project over the last 3-4 years. And if we have that kind of increase in the renourishment, you know, not that I'm saying we will, but we might be looking at to increase the taxes to cover that if that price doubles like it has in the past. So I think we need to be careful with that. The other thing too is, and I think Mayor Pro Tem and I have talked about this before, we need to do, and you know, I've been working on kind of a capital budget planning thing. We need to also understand capital projects that we've got coming down the road on this thing, and to make sure that with things like, and I understand that you know, if we're looking just at the taxes or property taxes, we can fund things like the firehouse and things like that. But I think that my belief, and I think that some of the members of the board share this, that we've got to quit borrowing money to do every single project, that we have to be a little bit more fiscally responsible, because it's great when debt is at 2 or 3%. But those of us that are older, remember the Jimmy Carter days, okay, and if we're borrowing this money at 15%, we got a real problem. And so I think I just don't want to leave anybody. I think that you're right, Mr. Carter, and I think Mayor Pro Tem is correct also, that assuming that everything stays static, you know, we may be able to move those things, but I don't think it should be expectation that I'm going to see this thing for 3 or 4 or 5 years and all of a sudden it's going to go away. So.
Right.
To follow up on that, we've got over 11 miles of beach. This covers roughly a third of that.
Correct.
We've got other beaches and we've got other projects that we need to be thinking about how we're going to pay for down the road. We know whenever we need to borrow money, where do we have to go? We have to put our Sunday go to meeting suit on and go see the local government commission. If we've got the money in the bank, you don't have to do that. So I think that anyone, well, let me rephrase what I was about to say. I think that as we walk the dog on tax increases, consider them, we need to consider that they're more than likely going to be long term.
And I guess my only thought on that is, along with what Alderman Grant said too, is I'm very concerned that we continue the correct mentality going into this. We would be going through this budgeting effort with Carter and Associates, whether we had the federal project or not,
Right.
Because we've got these capital improvements that we've got to make in the public safety building and other things. So let's just not lose sight of that. This is, I mean, we're in a situation because we've got to figure out how to pay for the federal project, and we've also got to figure out how to pay for those other items as well.
So I would just like to make a follow-up on Alderman Leonard's comments, which is very true. I think that when we are thinking about adopting a strategy here for the federal project, we need to adopt a strategy. I'm talking about financial strategy, the Carter's help, that we can apply to those other 6 miles of town beach, assuming that eventually we are going to have our congressional bills passed to amend the COBRA map and take our property owners' property out of the COBRA system, so that we can do fairly engineered beaches for the rest of the town. That's our ultimate goal long term. So I think we need to figure out a strategy now that's going to work for the federal project, but it's also going to serve us well and fairly for the rest of the taxpayers who aren't in the area behind the federal project? Thank you.
And I thank you because I'm in the middle. I'm not in 1 or 5. I'm dead center.
Okay. Anything else before we move on?
No, because I'll have questions after the second one.
Okay. All right, Andrew, I think you can keep moving.
All right, thank you. So we're bringing some updated information that we had shown before. In the last meeting we had with you, we were focusing more on the occupancy tax possibilities and getting additional revenues from there. Since talking with the county, and they kind of gave their thumbs up, and I know the town's going to be working very hard to get those done possibly. But we need scenario 2 looks at what if we get no occupancy tax increases and we only can rely on the parking revenue and the additional revenue we might be generating from MSD or townwide taxes. So scenario 2 assumes no occupancy tax increase to the town. And you'll see that, again, we are looking at the MSD split between 50-50 and 70-30 and 60-40. And then also looking at possibly doing a townwide 50-50 split or 60-40 split townwide there as well. So you'll see the graph is much easier to look at. It lays it out pretty nicely. We had the same types of trends that we had in scenario 1. You'll see that in 2A, which assumes the parking revenue that we always have, and a 50-50 split between the MSD Oceanside and the Sound side. Looking at this now, I probably should have made the Oceanside blue and Soundside green, but maybe we'll change that for the next version. But you'll see if we only rely on MSD and no additional townwide taxes, we jump up a bit from the last scenarios in scenario 1. It looks like 68 cents for Soundside and 53 cents for Oceanfront. And again, just to explain why that is, the values on the ocean side are higher than the values on Sound side. So if we are generating the same amount of revenue split 50-50, that's the reason why we have the different number of pennies. And then you'll see there in 2A, 0 pennies for townwide. 2B assumes a still 50-50 split between the ocean side and Sound side MSDs, but we're also splitting half of it with a townwide tax. And it's very similar to the ones you saw before. It'll take approximately 12 cents townwide. And you'll see that it changes the cents for the ocean front and the Sound side, 20 cents on the ocean front and 34 cents townwide. And again, to reiterate, we would add the 12 cents that were townwide to those MSDs. So the effective increase on the ocean front would be 38 cents, and on the Sound side would be 46 cents. And then the third scenario there, 2C, has a split, not townwide of 50-50, but 60-40 with 60% townwide and 40% generated from the MSD zones. You'll see that increases the town's number of pennies townwide from 12 to 15, approximately 3 cents. And you'll see that the ocean front and Sound side MSDs go down to 21 cents and 27 cents respectively. Again, add those 15 cents back in, and that turns to 36 cents on the ocean front and 42 cents on the Sound side. As we move again into our now new split of 70-30 townwide split, or actually in the MSD 70-30, so oceanfront 70% and the Sound side would be 30% of the generation needed. You'll see the pennies jump to 74 cents on the oceanfront, 41 cents on the Sound side, and this first scenario 2D assumes no townwide help. 2E adds in townwide help of a 50-50 split between the town and the MSDs. You'll see that the rates are cut basically in half to 37 cents on the front row and ocean side, 20 cents Soundwide, and then 12 cents for the entire town. And again, we would add those to the other numbers, though. The 37 plus the 12 is 49 cents and 32 cents in total for the sound side there. In 2F, we would do a 60-40 townwide split. So you'll see that the townwide number goes from 12 to 15 cents, as we saw in the last scenario, and it pulls down the number of cents needed on the ocean front from 30 and the sound side to 16. If we add that together with the town-wide taxes, we get to 45 cents on the ocean front, 31 cents for sound side, and then the rest of town at 15. And then we see the 60-40 split here again. This brings the numbers a little bit closer together. This is more reflective of probably what the actual values are between the ocean side and the sound side MSD. I think they're close to a 60-40 split. So you'll see ocean side is 63 cents and the sound side is at 54 cents. That assumes no other additional townwide taxes. In the 50-50 split with the town, you'll see we have those 12 cents as we've been generating in the other scenarios for the rest of town. That brings 32 cents for the ocean side, 27 cents for the sound side. With the town tax in total, oceanfront would look at 44 cents and the sound side would be looking at 39 cents. In the last scenario here with parking and the phase 5 MSD splits, here is the last split was 60-40 with the town. You'll see that the town-wide tax goes to 15 cents. It's as we've seen in the other scenarios, and the front row MSD Oceanside is 25 cents, 22 for Oceanside. If we add the town-wide taxes back to those as well, we get to around 40 cents in oceanfront. 37 cents for the sound side people. Again, this is all the scenarios that includes the increase in parking revenues the town's looking at, but no increase to any of the occupancy tax that the town currently collects. And I'll be welcoming any questions.
Just real quick, and this might be for your father, and it'll be for the second one too. Understanding that, and I think Brian supposedly was looking into whether we had that 1% we could get automatic or not. But when you're presenting these, aren't you going to have to present basically everything being occupancy tax or not? I'm sorry, property taxes, because that's the only one we know. Because we got to get approval on this thing. You can't. I don't see them approving. You said before, we've got to show that we can raise the money. If we don't have an occupancy tax increase in our hands, is that going to be acceptable? I mean, what I'm looking at is, what is the scenario that you think that you would have to present to show that we've got the revenue?
If I may, Doug, before you respond, I did look into that, and that bill, I was mistaken. That bill never got out of committee. So that 1% is not Mayor Pro Tem Benson, and her name escapes me right now. What is the lady's name that you talked to about it? Alderman Benson.
Connie Wilson.
Connie, thank you. They're correct. That bill never got out of committee. So any additional occupancy tax will have to be from future local acts, other than the 3% we get now.
Exactly. Alderman, let me say this to you. I think the question you ask is a very good one. And one of the reasons we've been running 3 different scenarios. One, hoping we get two new sources of revenue to go with our existing taxes. But in the final analysis, we're going to have to show, when we go to the local government commission, kind of what I call the, well, number 3. What if we get no new revenues at all? What does it mean? And I think it's been significant throughout our entire discussion that you as a board of aldermen have seen this consistently. We have consistently shown you what happens with no new revenues. And so I feel really good that your decision to move forward was done fully understanding what happens if we don't have new revenues now. Perhaps we could get them in the future. But the bottom line is now that we've signed on, when we start the project, we're going to have the money.
You answered my question. That's why I asked. I figured you're gonna have to present scenario 3, because that's the only one we control.
Well, I don't understand why we don't control the paid parking as well.
You don't know the number. So that's an estimate. Do I think we're gonna get it? Yeah. But the
I'm
problem
just
is when
thinking
you're,
it's in our control to be able to.
it is, but it isn't in terms of what the revenue is. I mean, he might come in and be able to argue, can we count 100,000 there? Maybe we got some credit. But I think what Mr. Carter is saying is the only thing we actually control the property tax. We know we can increase that. And is it $1.50 or $1.50? Mr. Carter is the maximum that we can charge, and we're under that in every one of these scenarios, correct?
We are. $1.50 is what you can charge without taxes allocable to voted general obligation bonds. Now you can add to 150 if you had general obligation bonds. You do not. So yes, 150, and 150 would cover what you charge townwide plus what you charge inside an MSD.
Okay.
What we would be doing with the local government commission, unless y'all would want us to do otherwise, we would show them all 3 scenarios so that they understood that the town was looking at this comprehensively, both in the fashion of new revenues, in the fashion of partial new revenues, and then finally, if those don't happen, here's the bottom line, and we understand what that bottom line is.
Okay,
That's why I wanted to ask you before we got to 3, because I figured that's the one he's going to be presenting. So.
Okay.
okay, I think we can continue.
Okay, Mayor, thank you.
Fantastic. And yes, just to reiterate Doug's point, we would probably show all of these options because we'd want to give them the range of possibility. And as we get to scenario 3, which is dependent on MSD and or property taxes only, I guess this is what we would call, for lack of a better word, the worst case scenario of no other revenue sources outside of just being able to generate property taxes. So scenario 3, and it's A through I, looks very similar to what we're looking at here, the parking and property tax. That graph looks very similar. It is just higher numbers because the parking revenue has to be made up through property taxes or MSD generation taxes. You'll see that the graphs look very similar, but the numbers have just jumped up in order to grab the loss of parking revenue that we estimated in these particular models. So you'll see that if phase 5 MSD and 3A is split 50-50, and that has to generate the entire $3 million between the sound side and the oceanfront MSDs. You'll see in a 50-50 split, again, due to their values within the zones, it would be 65 cents for the MSD and 83 cents for the sound side. This is in addition to the current town taxes, as we've been discussing as well. And then, of course, 0 pennies for the rest of town. If we look at a 50-50 split between the town and the 2 MSD zones, you'll see 15 cents would be required townwide. The oceanfront goes to 32 cents. Sound side, 42 cents in the MSD zone. So at the end of the day, the oceanfront people would have a 47 cents increase, and the sound side would have a 57 cent increase under the 50-50 split of the MSDs. If we look at a 60-40 split between the town and the MSDs, you'll see the townwide increase from 15 to 18 cents, goes up 3 pennies. And the 2 oceanfront MSD goes to 26 cents for its zone. The sound side would be at 33 cents. We would add that to the townwide tax they'd be exposed to as well. That gets us to 34 cents for the oceanfront and 51 cents for sound side. The next split we look at is the 70-30 split, with the oceanfront splitting their generation 70% and the sound side only 30% of the revenue generated, you'll see in this scenario, the ocean front jumps to about 91 cents and the sound side would be 50 cents. And there would be no townwide taxes associated there. If we split that scenario 70-30 with a 50-50 townwide split, you'll see the 15 cents needed to be generated from the town. 15 cents generates approximately 1.5 million in each one of these scenarios. And it takes the ocean front down to 45 cents in its MSD zone. The sound side zone would be 25 cents. Again, we would have to add the town-wide tax would also be exposed there. So the oceanfront MSD zone would be exposed to approximately 60 cents in additional taxes. And the the sound side would then be exposed to 40 cents of additional taxes. If we split it 60-40 with the town picking up, town-wide taxes picking up a bit more revenue, that's 18 cents. That's the town basically generating $1.8 million. And you'll see that it moves the ocean front to 36 cents, sound side to 20 cents. And again, if we add the town-wide taxes to that, we are back up to 44 cents for the ocean front and 38 cents for sound side. Our last split had the MSD split 60-40 rather than 70-30. So the ocean front would be producing 60% of the revenue needed and 40% in the sound side. You'll see the bars go to 78 cents in the ocean front and 67 cents for the sound side people, with 0 cents townwide. If we split townwide 50-50, you'll see the jump there, 15 cents again from the entire town, 39 cents on the ocean side, 33 cents on the sound side. We add that 15 cent townwide back to those MSD zones. We're up to 54 cents in ocean front and 48 cents on the sound side. And our last scenario here is a 60-40 split with the town, with the MSD, 31 cents ocean front, 27 cents sound side, 18 cents for the entire town. Again, we add those back in. We're at we're at 49 cents for the ocean front and 45 cents for the sound side there. So this is all property tax, no other revenue generation from any other sources, no parking and no occupancy tax.
And you can see it a 70-30 split just because that produces the highest tax rate for the beachfront side. That 91 cents plus what your current tax rate is less than 150.
Any questions?
Question for Brian.
Okay.
As I understand, maybe Mr. Carter, as I understand it, we could raise property taxes starting next fiscal year, correct? Can we raise them today, or does it take till the next fiscal year?
Well, in North Carolina, you can only raise a property tax at one point in the year, and that's the adoption of the annual budget. That's different than raising water and sewer fees or others that can be raised within a fiscal year. For property taxes in North Carolina, it's once a year, whether it be at large, townwide, or in an MSD. So you're correct, it would be the upcoming budget.
Because what I was looking at, Mr. Carter, was trying to understand the numbers and what the mayor had alluded to with the parking. So let's just say, I would assume we go to the LGC. For them to approve this, we're going to have to commit to raise the revenues that they think are necessary to get their approval. So if you start with that, then as you said, the worst case scenario is we have to raise property taxes. And that would be next year. All right. So if you take that and let's just say that we have paid parking and now we're 3 months into paid parking and it shows revenues, that we could choose to say, they've given us the approval, we know we would have to raise it. Are we then able to say, instead of raising property taxes by 50 cents, we now think we're going to get $400,000 in parking revenue. So we only raise it by 40 cents, or are we stuck with whatever they tell us we have to do?
Well, I think first and foremost, they're not going to tell you what to do. They're going to listen to what you're thinking. I think the dilemma is if you raise it at one level, thinking you're going to get another revenue, and you don't get that revenue, then that's going to mean the tax increase the next year is going to be impacted by a factor greater than one. And so I will tell you one other thing, and this is something Brian will have to become involved with at the right time. You basically, inside an MSD, we can really only establish an MSD and a tax in that MSD. And Andrew, is it the first year that you have to let a major contractor within the second year? I'm trying to remember.
It's within the first year. So we can establish MSDs, and if there's no tax associated with it, the clock is not as important. When you all gavel at budget time to establish a tax rate within an MSD, a contract has to be taken in that budget year that matches up or closely matches up with the revenue you're generating in that MSD.
I think that Brian, you should step into this. I think that you told us if we sign that agreement, even this year, that will qualify, that will allow us to do that next year. That they don't have to actually be executing the agreement. Is that correct, Brian?
I mean, there's a difference between executing the agreement and actually prosecuting the work for which the agreement covers. But I believe the PPA is a sufficient contractual obligation to meet the criteria within that year parameter.
Okay.
And just like property taxes, as the senior Mr. Carter said earlier, and I say senior as in that you're older than your son, Doug.
Just a smidge.
We've got the same would apply to any tax asserted in a municipal service district. That's done once a year. You can't start that mid-year. You know, you start it at the beginning of the fiscal year. So as we approach the spring and get through the beginning of the summer, you want to calibrate whatever tax rate in either one of those townwide or within the municipal service district based on what the parking revenue generations are. You can, I would say, especially the first year, I would err on the side of caution. And you can always adjust it the following fiscal year.
We're gonna have to get him to document that for us.
Right. The bottom line is, so we will all know, because we said this, the current 3 million roughly you have in revenue has to go specifically for the early call of the USDA. And so if somehow, I think as Brian was saying, if we became short in some way because we hadn't raised enough revenue for the core project, then we can't go back to the other money and get it, because we promised that we will prepay that loan with any additional annual revenues produced out of that roughly $3 million. So I just think as we get close to budget time, as we're looking at the other needs that you're going to have, we're really going to have to zero in on how this works. And I will say to several other aldermen or alderpersons earlier that it would be important over time that we accumulate some fund balance, because I agree with you, not everything can be done with a borrowing. We need to increase our fund balances. And the dilemma out of our current money is basically we can't really accumulate any fund balance out of our current revenues until we paid off the USDA. So I think it's going to be pretty important from the first budget that you execute in this coming fiscal year that you produce sufficient dollars so that you can produce some fund balances as a way to protect yourself if we have economic or other impacts into the future.
Okay. So, yes, Mayor Burton.
All right, I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing you, Mr. Carter and
I'm
Brian.
sorry.
Steve, so I'm going to ask this, and maybe you already answered it. But if we were to establish a municipal service district as of July 1, 2021, we cannot collect any revenue from that district until the Army Corps has signed the first contract that will actually put sand in North Topsail Beach.
Nope.
No, the PPA would be a sufficient contract.
The PPA will be a sufficient contract. he's
Yep.
saying.
So we can collect money starting July 1.
Yes.
And also by July, I think we'll have a more definitive prospective schedule as to when work will be under the PPA will hit North Topsail part of the project.
Right. Brian, I think you're right on all of that, and I think it's very well explained. I will say another thing about taxes, how we raise them in the coming fiscal year. We're making our assumptions on what we've been told by the Corps is your cost, 16.5. If that becomes 18 million, or God forbid 20, then all of a sudden we're at a new framework. And so, as we all know, our first debt service payments are not going to come due. If they start the project in 22, our first debt service payment really won't come until 23, I don't believe, just because of the timing. Now, we'll have to figure when they start in a year, and we have yet to negotiate. Is this, Brian, you may know, I don't, whether this is a 6 months interest, 12 months principal, is it a 1/12 every month? I don't really know what the payment schedule is yet. So we're going to have, if we raise revenues in the upcoming fiscal year, thankfully, we're going to be able to we're going to have about a year's money in the bank before we figure out what our real debt service payment is and how we're going to amortize it over the remaining period. So I do think this first year in budget decisions are going to be very important.
If I may add to that, Mayor and Board, it also works the other way too. If they're able
Yes.
to expand the environmental window
Yep.
and not have two mobilizations or a mowed, demowed, then mowed back, it could be cheaper. And then we would be that much
Exactly.
further ahead of the game. So, and I
Exactly.
think that's at least as likely as there being an increase in costs. So, again, I think the first year, I do think we have a year headway, as Mr. Carter just stated, which will work to the town's advantage. And I think as we get closer to the time, we're going to have to actually start writing checks. We'll have more real data and more real schedules in front of us.
That's correct. And Brian, if you're correct and the cost is down and we've accumulated that 1 year's revenue, then when it comes time to set tax rates in the first year where we have debt service, we could make other adjustments in a positive way.
Exactly. But I'd rather prepare for the worst. and
Well,
then
we
be
know
happy.
16.5, that's the number they've given us. I think we have to plan for the number they've given us.
Right.
Yes, but Mr. Carter, my point is that we're going to be collecting our tax revenues. In the beginning, we're going to be ahead of the game, but halfway through, probably through that 6-year, 5-year payoff, we're going to be behind, and so we're going to have to be paying interest on what's left of that 16.5 million for the last 2 or 3 years of that new construction process. Over.
Right. Well, that's what I have referred to you all as a board, the overlap period. There is an overlap period where you will be paying debt service to two parties. And the question is, how long is that overlap period? I think it's probably going to be 4 fiscal years. It could be 3. We just have to figure all of that out when we know our time better.
Any additional questions?
I did have one for the board. We've got so many scenarios here, I think, as it relates to what we need to prepare for the LGC. If we just look at this last one, that is property taxes only. My only question is, does anybody have a feeling one way or the other about keeping this split between the ocean side and the sound side? Is that anything that could come off? I'm just trying to see if there's a way to get to a more simplified.
I'd almost like to see how the numbers would fall out for a 65-35 split. And I know that's probably the last thing the Carters want to hear at this point. But
We can do that.
It's easier. Well, you want to go around the table? Okay, just one of the thoughts that I've, and look, what you gave us, the graphs and stuff are very helpful. So thank you very much. But when, you know, and I love how Mr. Carter talks about pennies. You know, one of the things we've done is we've arbitrarily, I'm using the wrong word, said 60-30 or 60-40, 70-30. It could have been 52-48. It could have been whatever. When I'm looking at what town-wide numbers are, my initial thought was instead of kind of gerrymandering the other parts, you say, if we as a board are willing to say we're willing to increase town-wide 5 cents or 10 cents, how does that play out in the other splits is one thing, rather than just having it, because the percentages don't mean anything, right? I mean, to me, if I'm a taxpayer, it comes down to how many pennies are my taxes? What is my tax bill going to look like? All right. And if we have, and I go back to something that Mayor Pro Tem said, if we're planning for stuff and we're looking out in the future, what sustainable amount are we willing to do on a project like this? And, you know, and what that split is. My other gut feeling is I don't like, and I'm just talking about the municipal district for a second, is if you're asking me my opinion on that, given the difference in tax and values and everything else, I would be leaning towards 70-30, that the ocean side pays 70 and the sound side pays 30. And then we'll get to whether because otherwise, you know, when I look at your numbers and again, the numbers are what they are, 60-40 doesn't do much for me. 50-50 would make me puke if I was on the sound side.
Yeah.
And I was looking at something like that. And 60-40 is too close to 50-50. So yeah. I'm just saying, I mean, if I've got an oceanfront home there, my taxes go up $2,000 on a house that I'm renting for $10,000 a week. Oh, well, you know, and you're also getting the tax break of paying the taxes too.
Right.
So,
yeah. Well, Mr. Alderman, you know, of course, the 50-50, 70-30, 60-40 were all numbers you gave us.
Right. No, all I'm saying is I would rather, if we're going to do something town-wide.
Right.
Okay, I mean,
if we knew that now, that would be such a help. And I think it would be, I think you don't vote till you vote, but I think to have some form of a consensus, and I'm speaking a little louder, so I hope y'all can hear me better, to have some form of a consensus of what the town-wide would be very positive when we go to the commission.
Well, and that's why when I was looking at 5 cents, or, you know, I was looking in my mind, you said 1 cent is $100,000 town-wide, right? And so I'm looking at this and saying, okay, if we went 10 cents town-wide, that's a third of the project cost that's being spread town-wide. Now, I don't know if that's the right way to do it, but I'm trying to balance what Mayor Pro Tem had talked about is if we go down the road and somebody wants to do something in front of my house, you know, frankly, I'm willing to pay more than somebody that's on the other side of the road or somebody that's 5 miles down that, because no matter how people argue it, I understand there's a town-wide benefit, but the benefit to me, and having seen after Florence, walking down there and seeing oceanfront homes who I could walk into their pool now, which were full of sand. The difference in rebuilding that beach in terms of rental income, in terms of quality of life and everything is completely different than somebody that's 3 streets over on the other side of the highway. And, you know, somebody could argue it's town-wide. It is, but it's not one-to-one benefit town-wide. But I also think we need to go back to, and again, Mayor Pro Tem pointed this out, if we can ever get past the Cobra issue with the rest of the town, there's other things the town would like to do. And so anyway, you know, get off my high horse, but it just, I think I would, and again, I'm only speaking as one person. I'm more comfortable if we're going to do something town-wide, picking a number, and then you can back into the other percentages by doing that.
Exactly.
Okay, so but you would still like to see, to keep the split between the ocean side and the south
Absolutely,
side?
absolutely. I mean, honestly, if you look at the size of the houses, well, the ones that are on the ocean, you know, and the other ones, I mean, I understand they're paying more taxes now.
No, I'm okay. I just wanted to see if there's any way that, you know, we get
Right.
down.
Well, like I said, I'd like to see us, what was it, 65-35, just see what it looks like. We're at 70-30, and we're also at, much like my colleague here, 60-40 doesn't do much for me, and 50-50 does not either. I'm sort of 70-30, but I'd like to see where
Okay.
65-35 would take us.
Okay.
To my colleague's point, I have, I've had numerous discussions with property owners and, over the past several weeks, primarily people who are not in the MSD, who are not in the federal area, and those people are not happy with the prospect of an increase in their taxes to support a beach project in an area where we're still paying for a beach project that occurred 5 years ago. And so going forward, I think we're going to have some big discussions about what we're going to do about the town rate for this project. While I am not opposed to raising our town taxes 5 cents with the understanding that it goes into other areas such as capital improvements, things like that, I am not at this point in favor of raising my neighbor's taxes to pay for a beach at the opposite end of town.
Mayor Pro Tem, do you have anything, what do you think about the sound side, ocean side split?
Yeah, I think it's a very arbitrary line that was drawn. Just this morning, I looked at Google Maps just to see the number of properties on either side of that dividing line. And it's highly variable in the area where we have 2nd Street through 18th Street. There's like 5 rows of houses, but in other sections of town, there is just one property on the sound side in that stretch. So I think it's a very arbitrary. I think what you're really talking about are the very oceanfront properties versus properties that are further from the ocean. And let's take the other example. Let's say at some point on the sound side, we're going to walk over to the beach, okay? So here's our house. We start over to the beach. We get to let's say it's in the area where we have the 2nd Avenue through 15th, whatever. Well, there's not a crossover right there. So now we got to go down 3 or 4 houses to get to the public access. So my point is, the people that are on the sound side, you know, it's more than ever for them to get to the beach, right? Okay, but the people on the ocean side, they may still have to walk 3 houses down, turn left or right to find a public beach access. It's not that much closer for them. So I do not like the idea of the split. All right, so that's one comment. My second comment is I would rather have just one municipal service district, and my splits that I'm looking at are municipal service district 50%, town 50%, 60%, 40%, 70%, 30%, or 100% paid by the municipal service district. If I look at my figures, if you had the 100% municipal service district paying for the project, just the people that live there behind Bay Stock, their taxes would be 60 cents, increase 60 cents, and there'd be no town-wide increase. And then as you go down to the 50-50 option, the folks in the municipal service district would be paying 30 cents and town-wide would be paying 21 cents. So I believe that there is a middle-of-the-road choice in those options that would satisfy some of the other board members' concerns about raising the overall town tax rate for beach that's not in the section where you live, and yet be fair for those that are in the municipal service district. So that's my position. Over.
Okay.
Well, even though we're not gonna be spending the current 3% occupancy tax that we've got right now, we're actually spending that on phase 5 right now,
Mhm.
and will be.
Mhm.
So they'll be getting all of the revenue
Mhm.
for that. So
Mhm.
this idea that we're not spending anything down there is not a real thing. Anyway, the other thing is, I'm still not sure what the benefit to the rest of the town is. There's no, other than possibly their houses going up in value, and maybe, and then, but they don't have really any, business down there other than beach bums.
Right.
So we're not gaining any revenue. The town is not gaining anything other than, hey, the south end of North Topsail has a great beach.
Mhm.
So we'll get more tourism down there, but we don't get the money from the tourism. So I'm at a place where I really don't think town-wide should pay a whole lot of money, personally.
Can I just say one thing, Mayor? That, and not to be the skunk of the picnic on this thing, an issue that I've talked to you about and some other people about is I understand the core project. If you have a lot there that does not have a house on it, they are paying 0 for that. Which means I've got an oceanfront lot. All right, first off, I'm not paying as much because I don't have a house on it, but I'm just paying taxes on that. As I understand it, and I mentioned it to the court, now we're down there, they're paying 0.
Right.
So now I've got somebody that owns an oceanfront lot who we are paying 100% of the beach renourishment in front of their home.
Right.
Right? How are we gonna treat those type of things? Because, or I think,
Well, their taxes would still go up. It's just that they're only paying taxes on the lot.
but you're missing my point though. Mike has got a house there on the beach. They are, the Corps and state are paying 75%
Yes.
of that $1 million.
Yes.
Down the street is Rick's house. They're paying 0
And
on
we're
that.
paying
We're
it all.
paying $1 million to fix the beach in front of Rick's house. We're paying $250,000 in front of Mike's house. I got a problem with that. I mean, I don't know what the answer is.
Buy up all the empty lots and get them built.
So that's just,
Keep in mind also that non-buildable lots have a very low tax value. Usually it's like $500, I think, something like that, or less. Some of them are maybe even 100.
My point though is we're talking about a fairness thing here, okay? I'm sitting there in a piece of property where it's not that town is paying for it, okay? Literally, the town is paying 100% of, and I'm not sure that's in the $16 million. Because the math that I've seen in those
I thought that
projects,
was calculated in there.
how?
part of the 16 million.
I believe it is calculated.
My
in
point,
there.
but if you, 16 million, if you look at the percentages and what they gave us, I hope that you're right. All it says is, if the project was $100 million, 50%, right, is being paid by them, 25%, and then 25% for us.
Right.
If it's true that 20% of the stuff in our lot is, then it shouldn't be 16, it should be like 18 or 19. I'm just saying, unless.
I mean, we can verify that, but I know that that's been a topic of discussion with the Corps for many of the meetings that I've been in, and I was under the impression that they had taken some consideration into account for those vacant lots as far as our pricing.
We could maybe ask the planning director. Deb, do you recall how many vacant lots we have in the
No,
oceanfront lots in the federal project?
not right off the top of my head. I thought that early on in the beginning of this, that was one of the first activities that we had to provide the Corps was the map and number of lots for vacant and developed.
I'm just saying, if you've got a small, if it's in there, I'd like to see it. My point though is, if we're talking about increasing somebody's 50 cents per thousand, and they have almost no valuation, to Tom's point, 50 cents, if I'm paying $100 a year, paying $150 is immaterial to me. When the guy next door to me is value maybe going from, 3,000 up to 5,000. I'm just saying, to me, that's not a,
And
I'm
how
saying, I
long,
think we need to address that issue too.
how long do we have to wait before those houses, okay, they're gonna have sand in front of them and whatnot. Can they become buildable? When?
It takes many years
No,
of
we've,
established vegetation to be
Well,
able,
let me answer that.
they're not just rebuildable because they get sand.
We ran into that issue with, in limited, with some limited folks in, phase one, when we did the project back in 2012. All of a sudden wanted to build houses on lots that didn't used to exist until the project. And I know that Brian Eads might remember it better than I and how we dealt with it, but I believe it, they don't qualify to be buildable.
Okay, all I'm saying is that
It's not
when
even
we
up
have
to
a
us
discussion,
To Kama.
right, when we have a
The
discussion about
property-
this, I am not sold on the idea personally
Trying to answer.
of, just sorry, real quick, I'm not sold on the concept of, I got somebody that's got a buildable lot there, who's paying almost no taxes, and the town's paying 100% to do the beach in front of their house, and they get hit with the same amount as somebody that's next door.
I think the odds are, if it's a vacant lot that's direct oceanfront down in phase 5 right now, there's probably more that are non-conforming than conforming. So
That's fine.
I think the number is probably small that you're talking about. I could be wrong. but
Sorry,
that's my
Brian.
opinion. Brian,
No,
were you gonna say
well,
something?
the lot's never gonna be buildable by the property owner if the lot was beneath mean high water. And again, that's a 18-year lunar epic average. Any land raised in connection with a publicly funded project becomes the property of the state. I mean, it's not their property right now anyway. I mean, if it's beneath mean high water, that's public trust owned by the state essentially. So if you've got something that, is adjacent to an area of the beach that due to this nourishment projects raised above mean high water, that doesn't, it's not like an accretion event where that becomes part of their property. That's property of the state.
And that's not the ones that concern me. The ones that concern me is I've driven this a number of times now, and there are lots there that are buildable lots that don't have houses. And I'm just saying.
I'm
if
not
it's-
saying it's not.
Right, I'm just saying if we're paying $16 million, if it's 5 miles, it's $3 million a mile. Which means for half acre lot or lot there, it's $300,000 or $400,000. The town's picking up 100% of it. And I just don't know that I'm comfortable with that. Anyway, future discussion.
Okay, and I guess from my perspective, just because we've gone around, what I'm in favor of, and I don't know what's split yet. I am in favor of some type of base townwide tax that even if, as you alluded to, Alderman Leonard, went to capital improvements, then we've got to start planning for that as well. As I said, not just the beaches. So some type of base tax and then the municipal service district tax. And I'm also in favor of looking as we start to come north on the beach nourishment efforts, if we're, once Cobra's gone, I think we're gonna have to take a look at each district and see what makes sense. And we may even need to combine some of these districts because I know we have 5 phases right now, but if you look at it, the density of houses in some of those phases just isn't really there. So I think we have a lot of things that we need to talk about, but at this point, what I'm hopeful we can do is come up with something that will work as a model with slight adjustments as we move up the beach.
Keep in mind that those phases were established back, I think, in the early part of the century, actually. Just to get, the board at the time wanted to get their arms around it and start to look at it. This is well before I was on the board, but used to go to the meetings. They had to break it up somehow because they knew it was too big of an elephant to bite at one time. And so they just started north to south, and obviously the south fell, the 5th phase fell in line with the federal project dimensions. But beyond that, it was They were geographically.
And maybe we keep the phases, but we just, when it comes up to municipal service districts or funding, we lump a few together or whatever makes sense.
I'm still stunned with the turn of the century. Just don't go
Yeah, well,
I thought that was cool.
20 years ago, turn of the century, I'm thinking.
Yeah, this century.
get back here soon, man. Don't worry about it.
So does the board have any additional questions for Mr. Carter? So for the board meeting, when we regroup again, the only thing we're adding is Tom's or Alderman Leonard, sorry, your 65-35 split.
Yeah, I'd just like to see it.
Yes,
It's
sir.
something they could even send to us. I don't need it. You know, if they could work it up,
He's got an Excel spreadsheet.
we just add it to the spreadsheet and send the spreadsheet back out. And have the town have. send
Are
the
we
spreadsheet
talking
out.
about taking maybe 50-50 off and replacing with 65-35?
I think that's
That's
reasonable.
reasonable. One thing we might want to do though, and I think you had talked about it too, is I think it'd be interesting to see if we just, instead of going with a variable on for the whole town, running in 5 cents and 10 cents, and just see what that looks like in terms of how it works out.
Mayor, can I make a comment about that?
Right, because the problem you get with this is, it's like, I'm looking at, it's 15 cents. What does that mean? Versus, you know, I think that generally, and I'm not, let me speak, generally people are supportive of some kind of overall increase. Okay. I think it'll be easier to get consensus if we did it, and there's going to be 5 cents or 10 cents, then it's going to be
Well,
7 or
that's
14
not
or 12.
It's really not.
It's not.
No.
You back into the other
Saying that
numbers.
the
Lock in
saying-
5 and 10.
Put that down as a baseline and then establish, and then that gives you, yeah,
I thought that's what Mr. Carter was saying too. That's an easier thing for them to model and say, if you guys want to do 5 cents town-wise and 10 cents, then the rest of it just flows from that. Is that correct, Mr. Carter?
Well, let me say this. I mean, it makes the modeling easier because there's not 3 different scenarios. So we're looking at lines that look like spaghetti. But from a policy perspective, I really think y'all have to come to a decision if there's going to be a townwide tax. Because guys, before we can go to the local government commission and talk to them about other borrowings, like for the fire station and other things we've been talking about, we're going to have to take them a consensus off of the Board of Aldermen as how you see this thing going forward. So I think we have data. We'll do 65-35 and all that, but at some point in time, we're going, because they're going to say, you're showing all of these alternatives. Is the board willing to do townwide, or are they willing to do this high on the ocean front at 90 cents? So I think we're going to have to find some 2 or 3 alternatives, not 18.
Yeah.
there's more to it than that.
All right,
though.
well, hold on. All right, Alderman Leonard and then Mayor Pro Tem.
You know, if we're gonna say we're gonna do townwide tax increase of 5 cents a hundred. You know, what are we going to do with that 5 cents a hundred? Where does it go? Because, you know, we're telling the Carters to put it in here and back out the difference and apply that towards phase 5. And that's not okay with me. And I won't support it. I'll support a 5 cent per hundred tax increase, but not for that. We're getting all our occupancy tax and everything else. There's a point in time when the folks who demanded that we accept this project, or that we endorse it and go ahead with it. It's time where the money for the town's share for that needs to come from those who are the best affected by it.
After him, I'd like to make
Yes.
just one quick comment.
Mayor Pro Tem.
All right, so I read in scenario 4, I gave you my preferred options, which went from, well, so those options that I read into the board need to be part of the consideration for the next board meeting. And I will send those to the Carter to add to the spreadsheet.
Can I say one quick thing? Mr. Carter, correct me if I'm wrong. I understand we may have an overlap in some of the payments. Okay, but we are currently paying about $1 million towards the USDA loan a year. We are looking at funding here to come up with the money for the core project. In theory, when we stop doing that, we are gonna have $1 million a year, okay, coming in for what we've talked about with the firehouse and everything else. As long as it comes in under property taxes, then we can apply, as Mike and I, pro tem, are working on, what kind of capital needs are we gonna need going forward? I think to your point is, I'm just looking at the cash coming in, okay? And to the extent that we've got money coming in from a property tax, and we wanna use, we're not gonna have $1 million a year for the fire station by itself. We're gonna finance part of that. I'm just saying, we can talk about what bucket it goes into, okay? But the reality is, if you do a property tax, we can put it where we want. And we should have a little bit extra money. If the forecast for the 3 million is correct, then once we've not paying the USDA loan off anymore, we should have that money free. Is that fair?
Mayor, can I make a comment to that? Right now, y'all are paying about $1 million for the principal and interest. You've had to use a lot of the beach fund for the storm payments and costs and other sorts of things. And so there's been payments out of that, not quite 3 million, but we're just going to round it and say roughly 3 million, okay? The way your agreement works with the local government commission is that money that you have presently dedicated at the end of every year, any amount in that's over $5 million, you have to call USDA money. So what the board has to understand, from now until fiscal 26, not one penny of the money that you have in your current beach fund is available to you for anything other than to pay off the USDA loan. Now,
That doesn't apply to stuff that's not in the beach fund though, correct?
Does not apply to the general fund or anything of that nature. It's only the beach fund. But I will say one other comment so we'll know about property taxes and what we have to show the commission. If we're going to raise tax for general purposes, well and good, we have to show them a plan for how you're going to pay for the extra $3 million a year. And so if that is not any townwide tax, we have to show it totally coming from the MSD.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Okay.
So, to Alderman Grant's point about the one pot, we got in trouble with that concept back in June when we approved the budget, and we had to do a budget addition at the last board meeting to get that money that had not been put in the beach fund like it should have been, put in the beach funds that would count towards that $3 million roughly. So what we're really saying is we've got to establish a capital improvements fund for the firehouse and whatever other needs that's separate from the beach. And we've got to keep those separate. In the past, the town has not had a capital improvements fund because we used that money as a contingency fund. And we've needed it as a contingency fund. But at the end of the year, then we have, it goes into budget surplus, but we don't have that money reserved as a capital improvement fund money for capital improvements. So my argument is we got to think about capital improvements, what it's going to cost there, and think about, if we have to raise taxes, we have to raise taxes for capital improvements. We got to keep that separate from the beach. Or we're going to continue to have this back and forth dialogue and
It's planning.
Okay.
Well, I'll tell you this, I'm not in favor of a 5 cents per 100 tax across the board for the town to support the federal project. Let me just say that now. I'm
my
not.
proposals are
I'm not.
21 to 13 cents, so quite a bit higher.
It's your game, Mayor.
Okay, well, I think that we've really accomplished everything that we came here today to do. So I wanted to thank everybody for joining us today via Zoom and here in the room. And I think we will pick up this conversation at the board meeting. And what I do want to make sure I understand prior to that meeting is what resolutions or what do we need to be able to vote on to try and get this narrowed down to some workable number, as we've been talking about, to be able to prepare for the LGC. Because we definitely don't want to go with all of this.
Don't you want to have Mr. Carter send us what we have to have?
Yes, he was gonna update, he said he would.
No, not just update that schedule, just come back to us and say, I'm going to the LGC. I gotta have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for you guys.
Oh, you mean resolution wise? Yes, that's what I'm asking for, yeah. So, and I'll work through Laura with that, we had already talked about that. I just wanna make sure that it's clear to everybody when we're going into that meeting, what it is we need to actually be ready to vote on or come to such a decision. Okay.
Mayor, could I make sure that I understand, or you can have Laura send me the new alternatives? I hear we're going to drop 50-50 across the board for MSD splits.
I don't think Mayor Pro Tem agreed to that. You did not, did you, Mike?
The 50-50 ends up having the sound side folks paying more than the
That's
ocean
correct.
front side.
It just doesn't make sense to me.
Okay, so there is-
I have no objection to
Good
that.
problem.
I thought I had wrote down you saying something about 50-50. so
His
that's
issue,
fine.
his issue was not about that. His
That's
issue was
cool.
about what the MSD should be, whether it should just be oceanfront property and everything else.
Okay, so we're
Not
going
about
to
the
remove
50-50.
50-50.
And we're going to add 65-35.
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
And then am I to understand we're going to have the MSD as one thing, not two separate rates?
Correct,
No, I don't think
correct.
we
That's,
said that.
that's a proposal that I want considered.
As an alternative, but not as a substitution for what we have now,
Right,
as an alternative.
Yes.
Correct. I have that as scenario 4, the MSD in one zone like we had it in the very beginning. And
Yeah.
then looking at it split in town-wide, 50-50, 60-40, and those other kind of split.
I've got it all worked out in your Excel file. I'll just send it to you and you can,
Okay.
you will have it.
But we want that in addition to what you've already got there.
That's correct. Other than we're going to take 50-50 split off to the two MSDs. It's going to be 70-30, 60-40, 65-35.
yes, sir.
Just in order to clarify this, really, what we're preparing for is scenario 3, right?
Mhm.
I mean, we know
For presentation.
scenarios 1 and 2 are, they're not in the can because we don't have the occupancy tax. We don't know what the parking's gonna net. So the one that we really gotta focus our efforts on is scenario 3. So are we just asking the Carters to perform these changes to the spreadsheet for scenario 3?
And he
Or
said
for
they
the
wanted
whole
to present, he said they wanted to present them all to.
Okay.
No, and I think that we still need to go, even if we have to go and focus on scenario 3 for the LGC, as we work into preparing to do our budget, we as a board need to understand.
I just figured I'd try to make it a little easier right now because we keep throwing rocks at, you know,
Well, that's
do
what I
this,
was-
do this, do this.
Right, but
That's
also
what I was
trying to
see.
streamline
Mr.
this a
Carter
bit.
said he's going to present, understanding that that's our fallback. He is
Yeah.
going to present the other ones
I
too.
heard that.
Yeah. Yeah, y'all see my hair's all combed and flat. When I start doing this, it'll be too many alternatives. How's
All
that?
right, gotcha. All right. Thank
One
you.
one of the thing that I would ask, with the one MSD, we are still going to compare that to the various splits on the town-wide tax rate, correct?
Mike, that's up to you.
That was a question to you.
The scenarios that I am sending have one municipal service district, not two.
Okay. Then we'll just make that a completely new alternative. We'll do it that way. Okay. Okay. One other thing I would say to you that we are getting to that I think the alderman made a wonderful point. At some point in time, the LGC is going to look at us and say, if we did a 70-30 as an example, because it's out there. So you are prepared to raise property taxes in zone and MSD, oceanfront MSD. Andrew, what's the number? I'm not looking at it. 91 cents, I think.
Yep.
91 cents. So, I mean, at some point in time, you all are going to have to, I don't know that it's a resolution. I'm not sure what the form is. We'll have to work through that. But somebody's going to have to raise their hands and say, we understand that if all else fails and all the other revenues are not there, and we only have two MSDs and we do a 70-30 split, that's the number. I raise my hand.
Yes,
Yep.
sir.
Yep.
So the alderman is right. That number 3-1 is the one that's going to be the toughest and hardest question, and that's the one they'll ask.
Okay,
Thank you.
Now, do y'all want us at the next council meeting? I presume so, right?
yes, please.
And when is that date, Mayor?
It would be the first date, the first
First Thursday in
Thursday.
December. It's the
December
8th.
3rd, I think.
December 3rd.
December 3rd.
December 3rd.
December 3rd. Why is that coming to my brain?
Your birthday.
I don't know.
We will have to do it. Unfortunately, I would come in person. I know what it is on the 3rd. What time of day will that be, Mayor?
It's at 6:30.
Okay, that's good. We would come in person, but that's the day I have, my wife's been out on surgery and I've been her nurse and chef and maid and all that stuff. That is her day back to the doctor, so I won't be able to travel down that day just
That's
because
fine.
that's her day with the doctor.
Oh, no, that's no worries at all.
We'll be back by Zoom on that date. Sorry, it can't be in person.
Okay, thanks.
So does anybody want to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Yeah, done.
Thanks, everybody.